So, exposure.
Awesome.
Yeah.
I'm about the same. I wasn't at that meeting, but I've been working with Chris.
Okay.
And we've been over there and visited and seen how, I've been over there now. My name's Willie Stone also. Jennifer, my principal, has not been involved in any of it, so.
Most of these guys always last, right?
Yeah, you had to stop by the office.
Hi, I'm Steve.
Mark, Oesterle, nice to meet you.
Hi, good to meet you.
Steve, I was just kind of start with the question of, just so I can kind of gauge, I guess I like the small groups because I think we can just dive into what your needs and questions are. So just kind of getting a feel for what your exposure has been to TAP, NIET, and so that'll kind of help me guide the conversation.
My exposure's been about zilch.
Okay.
I know there are, I hung around over at Sadell a little bit the last couple of years to kind of listen to Brad talk about what they're doing with it.
Cool.
But I really have experience with
cool.
that.
Awesome. Well, that'll kind of help. And truly, as we kind of go through, I mean, let's just kind of keep this as much of a dialogue as we can. You know, I'm going to kind of go through what the elements are, the pieces that look, how it kind of connects with what the teacher leadership grant is. You know, the exciting part, I think, for me is this is the only state in the nation right now that's put this kind of resources and dollar amount per student into something like this. There are states looking at little pieces of things, but no one has made that commitment to districts and kids. And in a bipartisan way with that kind of support, and you know, almost 100% of the legislature, both sides of the House approving it, was pretty exciting. The short version of my background and how I came on, I'm actually fairly recently new with NIET, August, but my exposure and connection with them has been over the last several years. The district I was assistant superintendent was an all-TAP district, so my 6 schools were all TAP schools. And prior to that, I was a TAP principal at an elementary school, K-6, about 600 kids. Arizona ranks their schools A to F, so you can letter grades. Yeah, real motivating sometimes. They decided to make that easy for parents to understand how schools were doing. We can get into that whole conversation at some point. And I was privileged. I was at an A school. We were doing very well. We were one of the top in the district. And my superintendent called and said, "Hey, we've got this TAP thing. We've got the opportunity to be part of this grant. Can you go? Like, I want you to check it out." I'm like, "Well, why would we need it here?" She's like, "Well, I'm not necessarily thinking of keeping you at the same school. I want you to consider moving down to our lowest." It was, if they gave minuses, it would have been a D- school Constitution. Just not doing well. And I mean, that bodes really well in the community, where it's kind of like, "Hi, welcome to Constitution. We're a D." Minus. Yeah, exactly. So my anxiety level went up a little bit. Then I went and checked it out. I sat literally at a presentation like this. There was a couple schools in Arizona that were doing it at the time, and I went and visited them and got a chance to see it. And I was hooked. From that administrative level, was everything that I had wanted to put into a building in terms of professional development, levels of support, instructionally focused accountability, that I never had the resources or finances to be able to pull off. And so I went back and I told her, Dr. McKay, I said, "I'm in, I'm sold." I said, "I'm going to give it 2 years, because if I can't take what I know is best practice in education, apply it in a situation, this is like putting my money where my mouth is at this point, I think we can make an impact on kids." But in 2 years I'm out, and I didn't mean out, I mean I was literally considering out of education. That if best practice doesn't work and the resources and supports don't work to make a difference for kids, I didn't know what else I had. And you know, I'd always promised myself that the day I stopped being effective is the day I've got to go do something else. Well, clearly here I am. It's worked out pretty well. You know, credit to my teachers. We won a School of Promise Award with NIET. By the end of my 3rd year there, we were 2 points away from being an A school and outperforming district average. Same kids, same teachers, just bringing the system into place and focusing on the right work. We were good at focusing on stuff, but not really focusing on the right work. And so that's what made it a believer. And I like to share that just so people kind of know I've been there, I've lived it, I've sat in the seat that you're sitting in right now, looking for something to make a difference. Now that said, we have schools around the nation. We're in over 20 states, over 2,000 schools, huge reach with kids. We have schools that are National Blue Ribbon schools that are doing TAP, because the system is not just designed as a school reform, it's a school reform movement, but it is not designed for just underperforming schools. It also works for highly performing schools looking to get to the next level. So the National Blue Ribbon school that I'm thinking of, it's a high school, and they were, again, National Blue Ribbon doing very well. They wanted something that was, but their AP scores and their ACT scores had kind of plateaued. And they wanted to see, how do we start bumping those up to that next level? And how do we really come up with providing that structure and support to take our teachers to the next level and really grow them? Because they were already really effective teachers. But now how do we take it to the next level? And you know, that over time is worked for them as well. So I like that, because it's something that, you know, a lot of times you'll see models, it's like, well, this works, but if your demographic isn't over 50% Title I, or you know, if you're not all Hispanic, there's some of the things that are designed to fit. And this is the framework to meet schools exactly where they're at, teachers exactly where they're at, and help grow them. So it's kind of that ongoing. And so I would, if I ever had to go back, I would never not look at a place that had TAP or a district that had TAP in it, from the simple standpoint that those supports, I know it's a framework that I can grow students. So as we go through, NAIT again is the main partner, the nice gentleman here in the middle, Lowell Milken. We are actually a part of the Milken Family Foundation. It's a nonprofit organization, but Lowell, big business guy, but passionate about education. You know, I've never seen you know, someone at his level, you know, self-made billionaire really, that is so committed to making sure that this works. So a couple websites as references for you as you just kind of dive in with your teams and resources. One is, of course, NIET.org. That's the homepage that comes up. And then the other is going to be tapsystem.org, which strictly focuses on the TAP piece. That said, under that NIET umbrella, there's TAP, but then we also have Best Practices Center, which is really that ability for districts to come in and work with NIET on all levels of school reform. So be it evaluation instruments, professional development models, you know, Common Core work, whatever it is. So the Best Practice Center kind of encompasses a little bit of everything that we do. We do some principal evaluation. We work with several universities on teacher induction programs and helping with teacher induction programs. So the Best Practice Center is kind of that broad piece. TAP is a system, or the system, but I say that because if there's pieces as you're listening to this going, I like these elements, but I don't know if this piece would necessarily work for us in our district or where we're at budget-wise, that's okay. It still falls under that umbrella of NIET. So TAP as a framework is what I'm going to talk about. However, know that if you're like, I really like that piece, and I think that's going to work for us, or that's something that we can do, you know, that's what we do. You know, a good bulk of our work falls there as well.
That is not a separate website, right? That's just within NIET.
Yeah, absolutely. So when we talk about TAP, there's four kind of main elements that we look at. This idea of multiple career paths, ongoing applied professional development, instruction-focused accountability, performance-based compensation. While the language is slightly different, I think that you see the correlations to the state grant. Yeah, just right there. And before you go, if you'd like, I can email you, or I'll give you my card. We did a crosswalk between the TAP system and the state grant. Ran it through Director Buck's office because I wanted to make sure that anything that we gave out was going to be accurate. They sent it back with no edits. So, you know, there's a strong correlation between what they're looking at. We're going to spend most of our time talking kind of in these three areas. We'll talk a little bit about performance-based compensation, because I will, from all practical purposes, there's some research behind it being an effective part when you loop it into a model like this. But from a practical standpoint, I would say districts that I've talked with in Iowa so far, 50-50 on that performance-based compensation. They're either in or they're out. There's very few that are on the fence with whether that's going to work for us. So we'll talk about what it can look like. The other piece too is that when you start looking at some of the budgets, I mean, there is a limit of $310 a kid. You've got a finite number, you know what your number is going to be coming in at. That if you see some of the other elements, this would be the first thing that I would also remove out. Not because it's bad, but I wouldn't touch the other pieces and save that. And this tends to be where some of the money can get spent. So you're looking at $400 or $500 a teacher, potentially, in terms of some of the performance pays, what some of the districts are looking at. So we'll talk about that as we get in a little bit more. Know that what we do, it's over 10 years worth of research, not only internally but externally. We have, every couple of years we hire a university to go out and do some independent research and really validate the data and validate the research to make sure that we continue to be on some of the cutting edge of what we're doing, and that our research is continuing to stay current. And then we're continually doing that action research throughout that. So we talk about the school improvement planning process. The idea is now to start streamlining the work and really focusing on the work as we get in and coming up with an evaluation, observation model, professional development that is aligned with your school plan, your district plan, and it's going to provide those ongoing supports throughout that model. First thing we'll talk about, which again kind of aligns with that Iowa Teacher Grant, Teacher Leadership Grant, is the idea of multiple career paths. The three main categories that we talk about are master teacher, mentor teacher, career teacher. I'm going to talk about a fourth that, knowing that the grant also asks districts, and I'll be as honest as I can, I think it was really tough when you are a smaller district to hit that 25% mark of teacher leadership within a framework. But master teachers would be full-time release folks from a building, so they do not have a teaching assignment. Their whole sole role is as the instructional coach on campus. So if you've seen kind of instructional coaching models before, they do that. We're going to talk about their job description a little bit, but their overall function is really fourfold. They plan cluster. Cluster is what we call our professional development time together, so that's that weekly professional development. They're responsible for doing observations, so going out into classrooms and observing teachers that they're connected with. And it's, again, observation, not evaluation. Only principals are still doing the evaluation piece. They're responsible for follow-up. And this is, again, one of those elements that is unique, but we do the weekly professional development cluster. Within the week before cluster happens again, there is some form of follow-up between a master and mentor teacher with every teacher in the building to see how that's going. And that piece is so huge because we know, a study that I just read a couple months ago, I think it was in Moving Forward, was saying that most professional development, there's only about a 10 to 20% transfer back to the classroom. When we go to national conferences or things like that, very small transfer. In TAP, because it's small, meaningful learning chunks that happen every week and there's consistent follow-up, 80 to 90% transfer into the classroom. And you're seeing it immediately. Even if you get a chance to visit Oesterle, in 6 weeks in, they were noticing shifts in the classroom and major shifts that had not been there before. And that's kind of exciting. But it was something that the teachers, it was manageable. It wasn't this, hey, Bob Marzano says, here's 9 great strategies, go and to do great. You sat in a conference for 6 days and you got it all, and now it just makes no sense, and there's no follow-up, there's no support. And they may take some pieces with it, but that's not how this model works. So the master teachers have a large responsibility in that. Mentor teachers.
What was the fourth?
Oh, the fourth thing, I'm sorry. And then individual growth plans. So helping support teachers through their plans, and which actually kind of ties in because they also do field testing work. And so field testing is in cluster cycle. They're looking at what are those specific student strategies focused on the needs of the kids, and not something that's so broad that we need reading comprehension on our campus and we're going to come up with a strategy. Well, it's going to look different in K1 than it is in 2-3 than it is in 4-5-6. So it's really looking at some individualized, differentiated strategies. So they spend some time doing that. We'll talk about what field testing looks like here as we get going through the morning. Mentor teachers are full-time classroom teachers that have additional responsibilities. So during the week, they assist during cluster. They're not responsible for planning cluster. They assist during cluster for the master teachers. They do some follow-up. They do some observations during the building. Obviously, master teacher takes the bulk because they're full-time release. How that looks for mentor teachers really is unique with about every TAP school. So it's a different model everywhere. We say 1 to 2 hours of time a week for a mentor teacher is really where they should be spending, because it really is the hardest piece, because they're doing a full-time classroom job and providing some of the support. So when we look at release time, sometimes with that additional stipend that they get, we recommend, we say, there may be a prep during the week that you have to give up to go out and do some of the follow-up and pieces like that. Master teachers will often release them from their classroom and go in and teach for them, so they can go out, and kids surprisingly get really used to that. And it's kind of sometimes a neat thing. You've got a high-quality teacher going in to release you so you can go do observation and follow-up. Sometimes the principal will come in and do that. Sometimes the follow-up will happen, before or after school, so they can meet with teachers and do some of that follow-up with that piece. But 1 to 2 hours is kind of where it's at. Career teachers are teachers who say, I love teaching, and that's where I'm at, and I want to stay in the classroom, and I want to continue to grow and develop. The piece that we're adding and recommending to get to that 25% ratio is we know that there will be some teachers that are like, master teacher, not for me. Don't want to stand in front of the class, don't want to do this. Mentor teacher, it's like, gosh, that seems like a lot on the plate, and I just don't want to take on that addition, even though there's the additional stipend, I don't really want to go there. So the kind of in between, but I'm a good teacher. I'd like to think that I'm a pretty proficient, sound teacher. I've got some good things to offer. Creating kind of a model classroom teacher. And that's actually, I think, I don't know if that's the exact term that's mentioned in the grant, but the idea that I have a solid teacher that I know that I can send, Mark, I need you to go and, I really want you to go see Susie teach and see how she groups her students and what she's doing with her instructional groups. So you can create those model teacher classrooms that they don't have to take on any of the district, they don't have to do anything different. They're already solid teachers that can go in and really be those model teachers for different folks in. Sometimes it'll be sending teachers in, sometimes it might be covering them so they could go do a model or co-teach with someone else. But it really helps build that capacity for themselves. That maybe, I do like this, maybe I do want to step into that mentor teacher role when something opens up. Or they're happy there, but it helps provide that and meet that requirement. I think it's kind of an arbitrary number in the grant, but it's there, so how do we meet it? I think that's probably a smart way to meet that. I think there's other ways too. I think some districts have talked about, as they have teams to support RTI. Some teams have leaders that are on just, like a management team or if you're doing like PBIS or something like that, that they can step into some leadership roles there and also meet the requirements of the grant. So just a couple different ways to look at it.
So it's meant for career teachers modeling, people coming in and seeing how they're doing it? Or?
Career teacher is just teachers. Okay, just teachers. The model classroom would be kind of that in between a mentor and career teacher.
Okay. Would the master teachers or mentor teachers sometimes refer to a career teacher saying, hey, I know you're having trouble with this level of comprehension, but go and see so-and-so because we know that they're implementing QUIM or some particular reading strategy, and then you kind of see how that goes?
Absolutely.
Or is that...
Absolutely. I mean, okay. The follow-up and some of that support can look that it's either going to a model classroom and observing someone, or a mentor master comes in and models for that teacher,
okay.
Or they co-teach. So a lot of times, or I've even seen it where a mentor teacher will come in and present, and then the master will sit back with the teacher and do like whisper coaching in the back of the room and label some of those things. Do you see how she intentionally acts? Do you see how this happened? And having that staff and support is really nice. One of the things that we talk about with this as well, that'll come up here in a second, when we look at ratios, really now if you visit Central Decatur or Sigdal, their ratios are going to look a little different because they're under a TIF 4 grant. So they're under a federal grant that does provide a little higher level of funding to have a few more people into the program, which is nice, but not necessary to be effective. About 1 to 25, ratio for master teacher to career teacher. So, if it's like you've got 28 in your building, I wouldn't say higher. When you get up over 30, it starts getting tough to really manage that as a master teacher. That gets to be a large group. A lot of times some folks have even looked at like having to do like a half-time master teacher just to support, like, so at a high school it's maybe got 35 teachers, they may do like 1.5, so someone has, teaches maybe 3 periods a day but then is released the rest of the time to be able to go out and support that. So some different models that kind of work based on the size of the school and where things are at. The other piece too is if your ratio gets larger, you get up to that 1 to 30, mentor teachers are already part of your budget. They're already in a classroom occupying, you've already got their salary covered. The additional cost only becomes that stipend. So you can bump up your mentor ratio to help provide that support for the master teacher so they're not having to do as many observations and things like that. Again, I talk probably too much on the research, but I'm kind of a data research geek. Some of the pieces, more effective leadership, collective responsibility, collective leadership of consensus of the teacher. It's, instead of being that mandate, that collective ownership, probably one of the most powerful things, because everyone starts owning everyone's kids. It's no longer that blame of, well, we're behind because third grade didn't teach this, or, you know, gosh, if the middle school had actually gotten math taught, then we wouldn't have these issues in algebra. It starts to be that collective ownership of how do we work together and really support each other in terms of developing that. And the professional development that comes in then becomes differentiated to meet those needs at the different levels. So it's not a one-size-fits-all, we go sit for a half day, we get some professional development, we have to figure it out on your own. I'm going to give you a third grade example, but kinder figure it out, sixth grade figure it out, high school, good luck. You know, if it's all together, but really bringing those pieces in. We talked a little bit about those job responsibilities, implementing cluster, that weekly professional development, supporting teachers' growth plans, replace evaluation with observation, individualized teacher support, leadership team participation. And then this process is also very 360, so part of it is a responsibility survey. So career teachers actually provide feedback back to mentor and master teachers to make sure that they're on target with the work that they're doing. Because the last thing that we ever want to do throughout the year is find that we've spent an entire year delivering professional development that isn't meaningful and constructive for teachers. If you do get a chance or you wanted to, Chris and Tracy, the two superintendents of Central Tacana and Cedel, have been more than open and gracious to have folks come in. Sometimes it's really powerful to just go and be able to watch what a cluster looks like, and or sitting on a leadership team and have that dialogue. I know it was for me when I went in to kind of see what that interaction is. But the piece that I think, I had a chance to talk with Benita Gonzalez yesterday. I was in Central Decatur, she was there with the team, you know, looking at the school, and she's just like, I can't believe the level of professional dialogue that's happening in this 60-minute cluster time. I mean, she was blown away. I mean, she was just, it was exciting to see, because, again, they're only 12, 13 weeks into this. You know, they are brand new just doing this. But she's like, I don't know if I've ever seen that level. And she goes, this happens weekly? Yeah, this happens weekly. And so it was just an exciting piece, and I love hearing that feedback when people see it kind of for the first time. TAP principal, sometimes there's that concern. It's like, okay, what am I giving up as a principal? And I like to say stress. Because honestly, I was used to doing it all. I had to plan all the professional development. I had to, you know, deal with the discipline, do the parents. I didn't have an assistant principal or counselor. You know, not my sob story, just reality of what most principals deal with. And then, oh, by the way, do meaningful professional development and try and follow up and try and support teachers. And it didn't happen. Just reality. Once I was able to get this team and my leadership team in place, which was my master teachers, my mentor teachers, and myself, I can now take that balcony view. Sir Giovanni refers to it kind of as a balcony view of leadership. And now I can see the bigger picture. I had to spend so much time in the weeds that I could never get out to actually see the big picture. So I never gave up my responsibilities as instructional leader of the building, but now I had a team to choreograph and direct and go out and actually do that support and follow-up to ensure that teachers every week got some form of follow-up in terms of what they did. And that piece was great because the follow-up was also differentiated. It could be simply a conference of how are you doing some of these pieces and just kind of a you know, a little one-legged conversation. It could be something more formal. Can you come in and watch a little bit of this lesson to see if I'm really getting your idea of questioning right or academic feedback? Could you sit and plan with me and help me do some planning? Because I really want to make sure that I'm thinking the same way that we want to think. Or it could be modeling, co-teaching, covering my class so I can go see somebody else. All of those pieces. Follow-up looks different based on the needs of each individual teacher. So it's sometimes you can get prescriptive because there's just a need that like I have to see this or we have to look at. When you're talking about lesson design and planning, you're probably looking at lesson plans. I mean, there's probably some prescriptive. I'm not going to come in and watch you teaching when we're looking at lesson plans, but it allows for that dialogue and that support to happen. Shared leadership team, again, those pieces. I love the fact that in smaller districts, I wish I had it when I was principal. We were just too large as a district, but the support from the district office to be able to have some folks, either curriculum director, superintendent, to be able to sit in on some of these meetings. And it's not a requirement that district office folks do that or sit in, but I think it's a highly productive way to engage with your staff, hear the learning that's going on, and then keep that continuity throughout a district. We were tough. We were only 4 out of the schools in the district that were TAPs. We were kind of like the redheaded stepchildren because they still had their district initiatives, that never really aligned with what we were doing, and I found myself being that middleman. So when we started engaging some of our directors in the work, they started seeing those connections going, oh, that's this, so do that and turn that in and I get this. So we had some of that dialogue and it really helped streamline some of the work from the central office into the buildings. So I think that, so when we see the other people that are instrumental, that could be anyone that you wanted on that leadership team. When we get together as a leadership team too, it is not, this isn't the time that we talk about duty schedules or, who's not showing up to parking lot duty and those pieces. It is instructionally focused. And so we have an acronym, it's called DICE, but it's basically we look at data, instruction, cluster development, and observation evaluation. To get DICE, we had to make an evaluation. But that's where we focus. We focus on that work. So what's happening in cluster? What does the data tell us about that? How is this impacting instruction? What are we seeing with observation data? We spend time as a leadership team assuring that we have really tight inter-rater reliability, because one of the big shifts for teachers is, wait a second, now it's not just my principal when I'm on cycle coming in to do an observation, it's master teachers, it's mentor teachers, and how do we make that? And how do I know that, we never want that, it's not like, I want you because you're really nice and you're sweet and easy, but I don't want Mark's to be really hard. That inter-rater reliability to make sure that we've got a very tight system. So they know that no matter who comes in. The other great piece is we look at the instrument. It's not a personality thing. It's not a, gosh, I would never teach that way. It's how did the lesson stack up against a set of instructional standards? So it takes all the guesswork out of it. It's, here's the evidence, here's my script, here's what you did, here's what kids did, here's the instructional rubric, and here's the evidence. So there's no right or wrong answer. Wherever you are at as a teacher is okay. And when I talk to teachers, the first thing they say is, as long as you're comfortable with the idea of, I'm at where I'm at, but I'm willing to grow, this is fantastic for you. Because it meets you exactly where you're at. There's no right or wrong answer. Even if you're still developing as a teacher and you're struggling, that's okay. If you're willing to grow, we're going to meet you where you're at. We're going to give you those tools and supports to make that happen. This is what I call the I like it slide, or teachers like it slide. Every year we survey anybody who's participating in the TAP program to make sure that we still have some of that consistent data. The support for that multiple career paths, again, really strong. Why? Because previously you either could go into administration or stay teaching, or leave. Those were really the three options for teachers. And now there's some people that's like, hey, I never, ever want to have to deal with parents or discipline or all the administrative pieces that come in. But I really want to do something with instruction. Well, now they've got some opportunities to really engage and do some of those pieces. Training and support, some of the things that we do. That initial training that we do is 8 days. That first year is really the bulk of the training. Now I can tell you right now, one of the things, and this is where the AEAs come into play a little bit, hopefully, is as we look around the state, we'll know at the same time everyone else does in March with who's applied for the grant, who's brought TAP into those pieces. But we think that utilizing the AEAs, because we're not going to come out and just say, I know you only have 2 schools, but we have to train you separately. We're going to really, that's not how we work. We can train about 50 people effectively at a time. So if there are 3 or 4 districts in the area that are there, we're going to bring everyone together, which is going to share that cost out for everyone. Ideally use something like this at an AEA, so it's something that's central, it's something that's local. You've got the great training facilities that, this is an ideal environment for us. We've got blank walls, we've got walls I can write on, and dig in and really do that work and that support. Things that we do throughout there, we also look at follow-up throughout the year. I like to call it we want to be as supportive as you need us to be and not become the annoying cousin that never leaves. It comes at Thanksgiving and doesn't leave until after the holidays. We don't want to be like, well, you have to have us this many days or you're not going to be effective. That's not the case at all. It's what kind of support do you find that you need? Kind of I'll say the carte blanche model is what Oesterle and Central Decatur have because they have the TIF grant and we can put that in. 4 to 5 days a month is what I'm able to be out and support them because of that grant. We say 1 to 2 days a month for that first year to make sure that everything is up and going. Now, how that looks, I like the idea of having it be, again, at an AEA, I'm going to pull all of my master and mentor teachers together that are participating within that AEA, and we're going to come and train together. because some of the things that they need to know are going to be the same with every building. I need to dive into what field testing looks like. We need to get into what IGPs look like. How do I support, effectively support cluster groups into some of that development? So we can do that work together, and again, save that cost because it doesn't change no matter if it's 6 districts or 1 district with where it goes out, which I think, again, hopefully is beneficial. And then some of the on-site coaching as districts find that they need. A lot of the work that I do and some indicators there, not only the training with their leadership teams, but coming in and I'll observe a cluster and I'll provide that feedback and coaching for them. I'll sit in on leadership teams, I'll go on walkthroughs with them, I'll do follow-ups with them, I'll do observations to help promote that inter-area reliability. So it's really what districts find that they need in terms of some of those costs and supports. We have a national conference every year. If you're looking to get to LA in March, the first week, I will tell you I've been to just about every learning organization conference nationally. I'm not saying it because I work for the company, I'm saying it because as a principal I never learned more than the time that I've spent at the National Conference for TAP. Just an incredible amount of learning and development. Just great time, a couple of days of just intense learning. So everyone is of course welcome if you'd like to go out. Even if you end up not getting the grant or only looking at parts of it, there's still some great learning. So, and if you wanted to see just like what a broad overview of TAP is going to look like and have that, for new districts that are coming in, our CEO, Mr. Mill, can do a group for those superintendents that they get together, and then we kind of carve out a specific strand for you to go visit so you can see all the different elements and how that works and pulls together. We also do summer institutes. I can tell you right now that there will be something in Iowa in the summer for these trainings, probably multiple somethings in Iowa this summer for the trainings. So as teams, you don't have to worry about, I have to send somebody somewhere to get some of that support. I can see us for lots of time in the near future being in Iowa in the summer, doing some work in the summer. And then again, those on-site visits as needed, as wanted, to kind of coordinate. Cluster groups. My absolute favorite time, it was, as a principal, I truly never tried to miss a cluster. There was those IEP meetings that came in, or those things that just couldn't be avoided. But watching my teachers learn and engage in dialogue was absolutely amazing. And it's during the cluster day. So here's another place, just reality, where schools and districts have to think, and once you find out that springtime is really spent hiring your folks and setting up your schedules to make this work. Because you've got to look at where during the day where during the week am I going to find time for my cluster groups to meet? Is it during common prep? That's kind of ideal. Is it before school, after school? For some folks that works, for some folks that doesn't work. I know after school is really tough in small places because everyone's either coaching, they all have some other duty that they're doing. Is they're out. For me, I had to go before school because I didn't have a way during my day to get that in. Some districts that I've looked at have been looking at a late start or an early release for an hour and building that into their time. So that way everyone's just at the same time. Cluster happens now, and how they're going to shake that out within their district. And so there's definitely some different models that can be looked at, but things to consider as you're looking at that, because we want to have that time each week for teachers to meet in their cluster groups. How that looks really is driven by the needs of the school. I could probably recommend 50 scenarios, and they'd either work for you or not work for you. They'd either all work or none of them would work. Typically, the secondary is either by, if you're on kind of a true middle school model where you have those, those groups, they would meet together. Sometimes it's by departments, so you get like math, science together, English, language arts, related arts together. Same for the high school. It's, you can do it by departments, you can do it by, if the 9th grade team works really well together and they're all sharing those kids and they see them, having the 9th grade team together makes sense, the 10th grade team, the 11th grade team, the seniors. Elementary, again, kind of that K1, K2, K3, 4, 5, 6, just because the needs are going to be different. And so how I present the information to you, if I present the same thing in 6th grade to kindergarten, one of the two groups is going to be mad at me or not feel like there's value. So really making sure that those groups get tailored to what they have. So a master teacher may lead, if there's 22 teachers in an elementary building, that master teacher may lead 3 clusters during the week. One for that K2, one for 3, 4, one for 5, 6, just to make sure that they get the pieces that they're going to need.
What your typical time for your cluster group? Is that something where they set aside an hour, or is
about
that
an hour.
something where
The hour is kind of the recommended. 50 minutes to an hour is kind of that recommended time. Any shorter, you really start to run out. And I'll kind of walk you through what the format of cluster looks like. But you really start to run out of some time. 75 minutes tends to be the sweet spot for cluster, but that gets a little bit harder to do, and sometimes folks break it up. I had to break mine up. We did it about 50 minutes before school, and then during their prep, and this came from my teachers, not me. They're like, we need more time during develop time, and we're really applying this. Can we get together again with the mentor master during prep and do the develop time then, so we can do more learning in the morning and then get some time to think about it, and then get together with you either that day or the next day when they had prep together and be able to do that. So that helped, and that got them close to that 75 minutes, and it was neat because that came from my teachers. Now, I certainly wasn't, they're like, we would like more learning, please. Okay, I can make that happen for you. But it came from them. If I had said this is what we're going to do initially, I would have had the pitchforks outside my office. But when it came from them, okay, I can make that happen. Again, some of the research that linking teachers to support, I mean, it really takes some of the work on professional learning communities to a deeper level because of some of the instructionally focused accountability, that tight framework that gets presented in there. This is, again, once a week, minimum 50 minutes, same thing that we talked about. How this looks, again, is going to vary by building, but principal, master teachers, master mentor teachers, grade subjects, and then of course your teachers that fall into those groups. Again, if you're running like an elementary building or middle school, 20, 25 teachers, is that about typical for your buildings? Just so I'm talking pretty close, 25, 30?
It's bigger.
I don't know if there is typical.
No.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's just all over.
All over. So if you're okay, I'll kind of stick with that 25 number in my head, and you're kind of either on one side of that number a little bit, but very doable. Like 25 are typically going to run about 3 clusters a week, to get into those groups. That is typical for each of the districts that I'm working with. My own district included, we run 3 clusters at elementary. It just tends to be per building on how that.
So you're saying max is 7 to 8 ideal max is 7 or 8 participants in each cluster, or 6 or 7.
15 is kind of the max.
Okay.
There's kind of you don't really want less than 6 to 8, because I'll tell you what, the dialogue that happens does start to shut down when you've got too few people in a cluster. So if you just put like your art, music, PE band teacher together, just the 4 of them, it's tough because that interaction just isn't there. But no more than 15 is kind of an ideal ratio. So if you're in a 6 to 8, 8 to 10, 10 to 12, all numbers that are great for cluster time. Because it becomes meaningful, it's that group to collaborate together. The other piece you get is when you have those tight groups, you get some of that either cross-discipline connection. So now we're supporting Iowa Core, which is kind of cool. And when you've got vertical at the elementary level, you've got 5th and 6s together, they can start talking and collaborating about what they need to do and really start building on those skill sets that each other needs to be successful. So there's some great, not only grade level collaboration, but there's some vertical collaboration or cross-curricular collaboration that happens during those cluster times. When we talk about what cluster looks like, we really look at the steps for effective learning. This is kind of the bread and butter of what we do. Steps 2, 3, and 4 kind of also look at a gradual release model of an I do, you do, we do. So a very strict modeling format for not only how we deliver cluster, but what we expect and ask for teachers to go back and do in the classroom. We do a lot of time thinking about our thinking and modeling our thinking. We call them step-ins and step-outs. So as I go in to deliver cluster, it's like, okay, I'm going to step into the role now of classroom teacher. And as I'm thinking about academic feedback, here's what I need to be thinking about before I do this. Here's what I'm looking for. Here's the clues that I'm going to be looking for in terms of what type of feedback. So we do a lot of modeling for the teachers, so they can, when they go into the apply and develop, they're going to be looking at how do I bring those elements into my own lessons and classrooms. What's great, so when we identify the problem, steps 5 and 1 kind of start off cluster. We always go back to student work. Student work drives what we do. It has to drive what we do. And it doesn't have to be formal. It can be, but it can be anecdotal data, it'll be qualitative, quantitative, it doesn't matter. But if what we did from the previous cluster, how did that impact students this week? Bring it back. We're going to have that discussion. We're going to identify the need. Where do we need to go from there? And then that's going to drive that new learning in cluster that week. So we always want to connect to see, did what we learned impact kids? Awesome. If it didn't, why not? And let's see what we need to do to support that. because we recognize that it is not a one-size-fits-all, and so if there's something that's not working for a teacher, is it implementation of the strategy that's falling short, or is the strategy itself not working for you? So how do we make those adjustments? The obtain new learning, this is kind of the I do. As a master teacher, sometimes the mentor teachers will take on some of that model, will model that new learning. The develop time is the we do in cluster, is looking at how do I take that? So it's a lot of, we ask, bring your lesson plans every week, bring the work that you're going to do. We're not telling you how to do your lesson plans, but what are you teaching right now? Not change what you're teaching, not look at anything differently, but what are you teaching? And if I'm talking this week about presenting instructional content, and I've identified some critical attributes of what presenting instructional content looks like, what can I do to take those into my lessons next week and apply that? And then that's where that apply stage comes in. That happens back in the classroom. How am I going to apply that? And then I'm going to evaluate what impact did it have on my kids. And so the cool piece with that is that it's very small, meaningful chunks. Where PD has typically fallen down is that we have something so large that it either takes weeks to implement a complete redo of our system. And this is, again, meeting teachers right where they're at. What can I do to bring this into my lessons and make some of those opportunities and try that out? And then, really, as teachers plan, we kind of ask them to follow the same model. There is no TAP lesson plan format. I can share with you a dozen that I've seen over the time that teachers have just found effective to help them as they plan this way. There's no effective. That's a building site level decision, leadership team decision as to how that looks. But when a teacher follows these same steps for effective learning, when they're evaluating their data, how effective was it? Then that's going to help me guide my next math lesson where I go. I'm going to model, I'm going to help coach them and make sure that the kids are applying that, and then they're going to go out and apply that on their own learning. When they do that same step, we find very effective instruction, and that's why we model that same step in cluster. What happens in cluster is always a model of best practice for the classroom. My teacher like it slide, they like getting together. I will tell you, teachers don't complain about having to come because it's meaningful. They hated my staff meetings because it was very managerial in nature and things that were just kind of, the compliance type pieces. They didn't miss. I mean, we probably averaged a 97, 98% attendance rate. Nationally, it's probably about a 95% attendance rate. People just don't miss cluster. One, we hold them accountable for it. But two, they know that there's good learning that's happening. And when it's meaningful like that, it's something that's manageable, really helps. Just lessons learned. Teachers own it. They work together, that professional development, the consistent follow-up. Small groups to ensure more relevant content, that model, the how and the why, and the other piece is that strategy is thoroughly vetted before presenting professional development. Year one looks a little bit different. We take the first semester-ish and just train on the instructional rubric. Why we want everyone understanding what those 19 indicators look like in the classroom. Past that, we move into what master teachers, we call field testing. And so that's if, I'm going to give a broad strategy. We know that at the high school level, reading comprehension is our struggle. So now as a cluster group, I'm going to look at how in language arts and social studies, or what's a strategy that's going to be cross-content that everyone can support reading with. And so I may look at using a directed reading and thinking activity, a DRTA strategy. And then I'm going to go out and I'm going to model that strategy. I'm going to field test that as a master teacher. So wherever you're at in your lesson right now, I'm going to come into your classroom. I'll take over for teach a section for the next 2 weeks. You stay in the room. You're in there learning and engaging as well. But I'm going to try that strategy with what your lessons are to see if I can help get impact with kids. Why? I can sit and say, this strategy is great. Marzano says it's great. Go do it. But if I've never tested it with my kids to see how it works in my classroom, it becomes not meaningful.
How does that master teacher do it if the content level is at a whole nother arena than what your strategy is? Because you may know the strategy.
Right.
I can teach that strategy, but now all of a sudden I'm either teaching French or maybe it's chemistry or maybe it's any of those higher end kind of thing. So then how does that happen?
Great. I'm glad you asked that. That's why I like using the high school example, because that question typically always comes up.
Let's say that it's an elementary teacher that is the master teacher, but then has to go model maybe a chemistry teacher that is struggling, or biology, whatever the case.
I'll say Central Decatur, their master teacher at the high school came from elementary.
Yeah.
And and when we hire master teachers, we don't hire them from content, we hire them for instruction.
Right.
And we coach the instruction. If I went in to teach a physics lesson, I
Right.
could teach gravity, and that's about as far as I'm gonna get. So what a lot of times at the secondary level is it will be some co-teaching opportunities. So I'm gonna partner with you, the Spanish teacher, and be like, okay, I want to teach some of the strategy pieces, I need you to deliver the content because I don't know the language. And so there'll be some co-planning and co-teaching that happens. But that's an exciting piece because now it's like, okay, I'm learning strategies, I'm seeing how this is impacting my kids. And now what, when you go into cluster deliver this, you've got an ally or two. Because they can say, hey, look, I was in the Spanish class when this actually really worked for my kids, and here's the things that we did. And you identify those critical attributes of what works, what doesn't work. It's much better to fail forward in a smaller setting than roll out a strategy that's not effective for all kids and we've wasted everyone's time. So that field testing gets done in that co-teaching, co-planning. Elementary is certainly easier because content-wise it's a lot harder. It's just easier. But at that secondary level, most of the time it is co-teaching. I just watched, I was in Louisiana observing a master teacher, and her coach, she was a language arts background. She had field tested in, originally, her comfort area. She field tested in the language arts classroom. Once she knew that that strategy was solid, she's like, okay, now I need to take this into math. I'm going to go out of my comfort zone. So she went and co-planned with the teacher in that math classroom, and they just did this trade-off. It's kind of like, okay, now, he was like, Mr. Elmore is going to talk to you about, we're going to go into this, so we're going to shift. It's kind of like, okay, now guys, when you see that, I want you to look at how we're going to highlight this, or we're going to break this equation apart. How are we going to attack this word problem in here? So she brought that strategy that was even a reading comprehension strategy into math. And then he went back and he's like, okay guys, now this is what I need you to do math-wise. And it was just very yin and yang connection. But it was just fun to watch because they had a really good relationship. She knew the strategy was effective. Now she needed to test it outside of her comfort zone. So when she delivered it to clusters, it was going to be meaningful. And then sometimes the great part is you may find that that strategy doesn't work in those. Okay, now we need to look at a strategy that does. Because again, first thing that will shut down some of the non-math and reading folks is this doesn't apply to me. And so sometimes you may have a group that you're kind of like, I have to come up with a different strategy for that group because this isn't an effective way to deliver instruction. The observations, clearly defined research-based standards, multiple, 3 to 4 a year, so that's definitely a shift for folks in terms of that. It does not take, so for principals, if you've got your novice teachers, your new teachers that have to be on cycle three times during the first year, you're still doing those, so the same thing that you would be doing anyways. What we've done with the 2 districts is we had to have a little bit of conversation around how does this translate to the Iowa teacher assessment, teacher evaluation system. The great part is using the TAP system, the TAP instructional rubric, you actually end up with more data than you will ever need for the Iowa instrument. And so what they've done is they've actually just gone through and labeled the indicators for teachers so they know which Iowa standards are applying in these areas. So when the principal does their evaluation, there's that clearing link. So they're not having to do 2 things. They're not having to do TAP observations and then go in and do another observation based, you'd kill teachers, they'd hate you. It's using that same model and then taking that. The only ones that end up affecting, so again, as you talk to teachers, the only ones that ever end up affecting if they're on cycle is the principal observation. That's the one that gets used for their Iowa. It's the way state law is written, and I think it's a good thing. The great part about that, though, is then when the master and mentor teachers, it's truly just a coaching thing. It is a complete non-evaluative piece. It's coming in and just saying, I'm going to watch your lesson, start to finish. We're going to take that evidence, we're going to build off of it, and when we leave, we talk about one, reinforcement. What's something during your lesson, based on the evidence, that you're doing really well that we want you to continue to do? Because we know that had an impact in the lesson. What's one refinement that if you made some adjustments in this indicator, not all 19, one, that's going to have an impact on student learning? And we have that reflective conference together. There's a lot of, in the training that we do with the leadership team, how do we coach through that? How do we develop those high-level questions to get teachers reflecting about their own practice against the instructional rubric? How do we guide them through? Yes, sir.
Those observations, you said 3 or 4 a year, those are done by master teacher, or those are done specifically by the principal?
Principal, master, mentor.
Okay.
So all three share that. So it's not the principal having to do 4 for every teacher.
That's what I was wondering. And do they try to go in all 3 together so they have a comparison to do those observations, or do they go in separately?
That's a great question. What we recommend typically the first year while the instructional cycle is going on, that the first one at least is paired up for some of the inter-rater reliability. Because I want to go as I go in, so we may pair up and go in and do a lesson together and compare notes. One of us will take the lead on actually doing the post-conference with the teacher, but it allows some of that setup. We also recommend kind of a split, half announced, half unannounced. The announced come with a pre-conference, which I think especially for mentor teachers and master teachers who maybe haven't had that administrative background, really gives kind of a clue ahead of time as to what that could look like. So we can sit down and have a conversation about what am I expecting to see? What do you want me to look for? What are some things that, you think it's like, gosh, you know what? I really don't think I've been doing academic feedback. Like, I don't think that I'm consistent enough with how I'm giving feedback or to everybody. Can you watch for that during this lesson? So we get some look-fors. We can maybe look at lesson plans ahead of time going, you know what? I don't really see an evaluate piece. How are you going to measure that your students learned something in this? So you can do some coaching ahead of time, which is great. The unannounced is you walk in, you see what you get, but everyone gets that post-conference. You still rate all 19 indicators, so they still get a score on that 1 to 5 scale, but they don't, we don't talk about it, because that one overwhelms them. If I gave you 19 things to improve on, you do none.
Right.
And what we found across the board is typically what those refinements are start to become reinforcements, because teachers had something and now they're actually improving. And so it's fun because you end up having these conversations. I would go in as a principal and I go, wow, I just saw this amazing lesson. And their level of grouping, their grouping in the classroom is fantastic. Like, are we talking about the same teacher? I said, yeah, absolutely. That was their reinforcement last time, but because it was something that they had a conversation about, they walked away with some skills, they actually focused on it, and now they brought that into their classroom and it becomes a strength for them. So that piece again continues to, I love the post-conference. I think it's just a powerful piece to have just a great reflective conversation. Again, some of the other, the research behind it, which is of course out there. And again, how could I ever help a teacher grow if I only went into their classroom once a year, once every 3 years, and had a conversation about their instruction? Now it's those multiple things. Now what's great is we have the code system, which is our database, that all of those observation scores get entered into by teacher. So at the superintendent level, the principal level, I can look by building, by every indicator to see where my strengths and weaknesses are. I can look by grade level to see what indicators are strong, what indicators I still need to work on. So when I'm meeting as my leadership team, I can use that data to make sure that, hey, I know we're going to be talking about this reading comprehension strategy, but I really need to emphasize how academic feedback and presenting instructional content are linked, because those tend to be the weakest area for this cluster group. So I need to really emphasize and make those connections for folks. So some great data that now, instead of just, there's an observation, I know what I did with it, my file. I gave them to the teacher and I filed. We signed them and we moved on. Now I've got data that I can actually use that to drive my professional development and continue to be differentiated in what I'm doing for my teachers.
But the 19 indicators that you're talking about, how does that crosswalk work with the 8 standards, 42, 43 criteria?
Really, really well, and that's what they ended up doing in Oesterle and Central Decatur, is they just, on that final one, they went through and they indicated, so when they did the post-conference, they crosswalked which indicators would fall into those 19, which of the 8 would fall into the 19.
Okay.
So some of them doubled up and were in different multiple places.
Right.
And then, so when they had to turn in the state form, because that's the compliance piece, they just transferred that over and into that. So they're trying to, again, eliminate some work for them. The other piece at school with the instructional rubric, and I'll gladly share with you, is the crosswalk between Iowa Core and Common Core. We started our work, of course, with Common Core, but Iowa Core still is pretty well aligned with that. How those 19 instructional indicators support core alignment. And so what's great is when we start looking at the TAP system, it becomes the how for all the what's that we have to do. So when we look at RTI TAP, it becomes the how do we deliver that to teachers? When we look at Common Core, when we're talking about thinking and problem solving and presenting instructional content, providing high-level questioning, that's all bringing in those elements of what Common Core is asking us to be able to do, but now we've got a common framework and vocabulary. I still may teach, and I have to teach, like what a close reading strategy is, what the mathematical shifts are, and some of those practices we're looking at. But now I've got a structured system in place to deliver that and link it back to what my instruction already looks like, what I know as a teacher my instruction looks like. So when we talk about this, here's the areas on the indicators that when you do this, you're going to meet that core standard. are these elements of what core is supposed to look like. The research-based, we talked there. I just want to show you. The TAP rubric is broken into 4 domains: designing and planning, instruction itself, the learning environment, responsibilities. You can see the bulk of the work is in the instructional category. And that's really where the meat is. Learning environment, nothing unexpected there. Managing student behavior, expectations, environment, culture. Designing and planning instruction, it's what are your plans, what kind of student work are you generating, what assessments are you using, formal, informal, exit ticket out the door, whatever that is to measure some student progress. The responsibilities, this is actually a survey that's formally completed at the end of the year, informally during the year, so you got some progress checks, but it's not only career teachers providing input to the master and mentor teachers on how well cluster is going and what kind of support they're getting, then master and mentor teachers, principals providing that back for teachers as well. Some of it is a little bit managerial, so it's like, school responsibilities. Am I showing up to cluster? Am I doing the things that I need to do? This is the small, these categories are weighted, bulk of it's in instruction. This is the lowest weighted category. Staff development, are we attending, are we participating? Do we, are we reflecting? Do we keep our IGP, our individual growth plans up to date? Are we doing those pieces that we need? An example of the rubric, my only moving graphic in the whole thing. This is just standards and objectives, and we rate on that 5-point scale. A major shift in thinking for teachers is the fact that before it was either I'm proficient or I'm not proficient. We train and teach to right in the middle. 3 is rock solid teaching, proficient teaching is at a 3 level. It is teachers who are moving students a year's growth in a year's time for their kids that they've had all year. And so the shift is, wait a second, I'm used to being at the top end and I want to be a 5. But this is the rock star end, where we're looking at when we've got teachers that are consistently scoring 4s and 5s across the board. They're moving students in their classroom 1.5 to 2 years worth of growth. So when we've got teachers that are performing up in this high end, the correlation should be that we're seeing that high level of growth. 3 rock solid, and again, it's a shift, but it's that conversation, because we recognize, most learning objectives and state content standards are communicated. Pieces happen. Once we go through and train and identify, and that's why we spend that first semester in the first year really looking at what these elements look like, what do we expect to see on our campus, so people get comfortable with that, because it is a shift in thinking for teachers. But now it gives conversations on how do I grow this. You'll see that from 3 to 5, you also go from more teacher-directed to more student-centered classrooms. So that shift starts to happen across time.
When you say 1 to 2 years growth, what are you basing that on?
We look at value-added growth. So typically with the grants that we work with, it's always high-stakes testing. A lot of times it can be based on map data. So if people are using NWE map data or something similar, they look at that pre and post and what that growth is. And it's growth expected against a typical peer. It is not an artificial benchmark of how many kids are above 80%.
Right.
It's if I'm looking at a general ed 4th grade student compared to all other general ed 4th grade students in this sample group that are taking the Iowa assessment, what would I expect a year's growth to be, and did they outperform that or did they underperform that?
So we're on map testing, so with your map testing, you would take the expected year's growth, and
expected year's growth. If they're above that, then that'd be value added 4, value added 5. If they're below that, it's value added 2, and it's standard deviations away from the mean.
Okay.
If you like this, okay, you get the stats. But what's cool with that is before, teacher observation was completely non-predictive of student performance. Nationally, there's a slide that's coming up, but nationally, most teachers, 80–90% of the teachers have the highest observation scores or evaluation scores, and there is no correlation to student performance. With the TAP system, highly correlated to student performance. Why we have good iterator reliability, we know that the instructional strategies that we talk about matter and impact kids, and I'll be honest, I didn't believe it at first, when I first started as a principal. So I sat and I force ranked all of my teachers, and I pulled all of their average scores at the end of the year. And when testing came out, we had the Ames test in Arizona. When that testing came out, I took all of their value-added scores and almost across the board. It was spot on. My highest performing teacher had the highest growth for her kids. She was a value-added 5. I mean, I loved Donna Newport. She was awesome. And no surprises that some of my teachers that were scoring, averaging in the 2s, were struggling to get a year's growth out of their kids. And their value-added score was very comparable to that. Sometimes you get some fluctuations in there, but 80% correlate, I mean, it's a high correlation between that. So as we go through, we train, and then we look at what these descriptors are for each of these categories. We define those for a campus, we work through that. We always continue to reference back to this. So it's cool. After you get in about a year and you've just got teachers that start talking this language together, and conversations at the hall. Hey, I need some help with my questioning on this lesson. I've really struggled with how I'm going to group these students and how I'm going to design activities and materials to do this. And I don't know, as a principal, I geek out on that stuff. When I start seeing that level of professional dialogue happening, it's pretty fun. Responsibility survey, same thing that we talked about, just that survey. It's an online survey that they take at the end, providing some of that. We do some of those informally because, again, I want to be benchmarking as a leadership team to make sure that I'm meeting the needs of my teachers. I don't want to wait till the end of the year and go, oops. So we look at that responsibility survey. We talked about what the post-conference is, the introduction. There's the reinforcement, the refinement, ratings and evidence. When we look at inter-rater reliability, we look within 1 point. So if I scored you a 3 and you scored yourself a 2, that's inter-rater reliability, within 1 point on that rubric. If you scored a 4 and I scored a 3, it's still valid. This is also a 360 process, so teachers self-evaluate, self-reflect, and give themselves a score on the 19 indicators. Something new, and it actually counts as their overall average. It's a small percentage, 10% of the weight. So it's not anything that's going to completely overly influence, like I'm just going to give myself all 5s so I can sway what my average is. It doesn't move it significantly enough to have any impact, to have that significant of an impact that is going to change over time what that's going to look like. But you know what, we don't change any of them. Most teachers are tough on themselves. They really are. I mean, I will say out of the gate, you'll have teachers that will typically score themselves harder than you will score them as you go and do the observations. Because they tend to be tough on themselves, they tend to be very reflective. Will you have teachers that will give themselves all 5s? Absolutely. You'll finish the lesson, they'll just fill it out for you and hand it right back to you. Go, I'm all 5s. But you know what, and I always look at it as, I breathe deeply for a second, that's where they believe that they're at. So that is the reality of what I have to work with. So now as I'm having my post-conference, I have to structure my post-conference around, here's the evidence that I saw and why I think it's only a 3. What evidence did you have? What are you reflecting on that makes you think that it's the 5? And by the second or third observation, you have those teachers that are giving themselves all 5s, and you have that conferencing, they start to shift down. They really do. One of my worst personal example, 3 years of all 5s, but finally kind of came in and really made some adjustments to their instruction and saw that. And then not only, even though they were still thinking about it, they started inching themselves up from 2s into 3s. And their scores, their self-reflection started inching back down a little bit because they started to see what that looked like. But it's okay. It's where they think they're at. And I just look at it as it's a data point. Perception is reality. Their perception of their teaching is there. Okay, I have to bring them in line with reality. And that's my job as the observer. So I never looked at it as a bad thing. We just had to have that conversation around it and meet them where they're at. This is that chart that I was showing about those ratings. And then the goal is over time we see that teacher scores, when we have consistent or stable campuses, you do start to see that shift toward the higher end. And again, you start to see those student results move toward the higher end as well, which is what we want to see. But this is that from the book, the New Teacher Projects, the Widget Effect that they talked about. Fun read if you ever get a chance to look at it. Teachers like the instructional rubric. This is my teacher like it slide. But again, it's no one fought the rubric. And even for my veteran teachers coming in, more times than not, and again, there's going to be that 10%. It's always going to be out there and kind of push and kick it back a little bit. That's reality. This is not the silver bullet that's going to fix everyone. But it's just great when teachers was like, I wish I had this 10 years ago. I wish I had some of these pieces 10 years ago to apply in my classroom because I think it could have been more effective. I, as a principal, went and apologized to my staff and just said, I'm sorry for some of the professional development that I've led because it's been nowhere near the quality of what we're doing. And no wonder I was frustrated that I never saw this happening in the classroom. When I can see stuff that happened in the cluster a week or 2 later actually being applied and used in the classroom, that's just, that to me, that's what I geek out on a lot. The decade of results, I mean, we can roll through these. Obviously, I wouldn't share anything. It's like, it's effective. When it's applied correctly, TAP's effective, and we get results. And that's been replicated, like I said, 20 states, over 2,000 schools. Are there examples of where this didn't work? Absolutely. If you Google, TAP failure, you're going to come up with schools and stories, why they didn't implement it. they decided, well, we won't do this professional development thing, we'll just do it monthly, because that's what we're doing, or we'll make it broad, or we won't do those pieces, or we won't do as many observations, or we won't give feedback, or we'll just skip the post-conferences. Guess what? Yeah, you don't get results, amazingly enough.
So then it wouldn't really be TAP
Right, yeah, it stops being
then,
done.
as far as the criteria.
As far as the criteria.
Yeah.
These are just, again, some of the pieces. Louisiana has been one of the states doing it the longest, continuing to outperform TAP schools over non-TAP schools. This is national data over time for implementation. You see kind of the close. And even when other schools have grown, they've still outperformed. This was from Algiers Charter Association. This was also down in Louisiana, where the state was. We're in that 5-year span. How significantly below the state average they were to where they were above. That's math, and both results in math and reading. The other intangible benefit, number one question new teachers ask coming into the profession is, what level of support are you going to give me as a new teacher to be successful? A study that was just out, I apologize, I don't remember the reference. But they asked me, what's the one thing that new teachers are looking for entering the profession? And it's that ongoing professional support. The great part is a recruitment tool. It's like, let me tell you what kind of support we're going to get. We've got weekly, you've got a master, you've got a mentor, you've got your principal, you've got a follow-up every week, you've got all these supports. Over time, we know over 50% after 5 years leave the profession. New teachers that enter in TAP, close to over 90% stay in the profession because of that ongoing applied support. They see a career path, they see opportunities for their own advancement, and they've got that support that's going to keep them in. So if you struggle with being able to keep and retain teachers, there's some intangible benefits because of the supports that are in place. Knox County, this was after 2 years, 11 schools had above a year's growth. Now they still had a school, had some principal changes and some leadership changes in there, so again, we can look back to the specifics, but bulk of schools really impacting. Tennessee as a state, one of our big success stories, they adopted just the instructional rubric 2 years ago. So as their teacher evaluation model for the state. So they used that 19-point indicator, went and trained all the evaluators. In 2 years, they had their highest value-added growth that they've ever had as a state. And they had done nothing, there's no other shift that's happened in the state. I mean, local stuff, but as a whole. NAEP scores just came out about a month ago. Now, Tennessee is never on the top with NAEP, but they had the highest growth in NAEP in that 2-year gap, same time that they implemented this rubric. So, some really impressive results. Texas has seen some of those same pieces, South Carolina, Louisiana, Indiana. Those are some of our bigger states that we're in multiple places. Arizona. Teacher collegiality, this is another great one. If culture is sometimes an issue, this helps boost culture. Why? Because everyone's working together. Everyone's talking the same talk. It's no longer this isolation, I'm going to go into my classroom and just do my thing. We're kind of forced to do some collaborating and working and getting to know other people. And that ability to build that teacher collegiality has just been huge. The alignment to Iowa Core. And if you would like this PowerPoint at the end, I'll give you my business card. Just let me know and I'll send it off to you so you can look through some of the slides. And I'll put the email, or I'll put the website addresses on there, the tapsystem.org. It's got a bazillion resources that are in there for you to look at. We can just say it does. Other fun stuff, we've got support tools. We've got our portal. It's an online database. We have hundreds of hours of video of model lessons. So if I want to see what good academic feedback looks like, I can go in and pull academic feedback for 5th grade and see what an example of that's going to look like and how the national raters did it and what the evidence was to support that. There's training modules that are on there. There's research that's on there. Really things that all of our national conference work, the presentations get put up there, so they're available to folks on the portal. Some really great resources that are out there. And then code system, of course, is looking at the having all of your clusters in there so you can monitor that. Leadership team logs go in there, your cluster records go in there, so it's really an online database of everything that you've done as a campus. Teacher IGPs go online, the observation scores go online. If you're a tech geek, there's the TAP app. So if you like to do notes and scripting and things online, you can just go into the TAP app and then you categorize your evidence in the app. The new version that's coming out this summer, you'll hit a button, it'll actually automatically upload to code. So that piece is done for you, which is pretty nice. Again, the portal, it will look different. We're coming out with Portal 2.0. July is our target date, so it's ready for the next school year. But just more videos, more improvements, not that it's not user-friendly, but I think a little more intuitive when we get in there. This is just an example of the report. So as I look for that inter-rater reliability, these are my indicators. These are my 3 mentor teachers, and I'm looking, do I have tight inter-rater reliability across the board? I'm thinking, okay, we're good, we're good, we're good. I'm gonna look here and go, okay, why is mentor B scoring questioning so much higher than everybody else? But it allows me to have a dialogue and conversation. And so maybe as a principal, I'm gonna go in, and I'm just gonna script a lesson with them. How are you looking at just questioning? So we can look and see how they're looking at some evidence and how the rest of the team is looking at it. But you name it, you can just aggregate the reports just about any way you want to. Tap out from yourself. Texas is looking at this. We've got 300 pilot schools there right now that, again, is looking at this as their, they call it their appraisal system, which is their evaluation observation system. And we are a finalist for the state observation system in Texas. So kind of an exciting time because they're kind of big. And to come into Texas, that's not something Texas created, is like one of those huge compliments because Texas does Texas things. You know Texas. Tennessee, same thing. We talked about Tennessee. Some of that student growth, that continued growth over time. During these years, how does this all shake out? If you decide this is where you want to go, you get to March, you write for it, you're accepted. A couple of things we come in. We are available, we'll provide guidance in terms of what some recommended job descriptions would be for master and mentor teachers, some hiring and selection criteria, because that hiring of the master teachers is the most important thing you're going to do. It's scary to take one of your best teachers out of the classroom, but I will tell you the ripple effect that ends up happening on a campus is huge. And you'll get it if you're a Star Wars geek. When one Sith falls, another Sith rises. Someone takes that leadership void. And it's amazing how many times we've seen it, where you think that, oh my gosh, I'm pulling this teacher out of this grade level, out of this department, and I don't know how we're going to survive without them. Someone else steps in, they've just been living in that shadow and never had the opportunity because they've always just defaulted to the person. Very, very rarely do you even see a bump or a dip in performance in that grade level because they step up and they rise up to the occasion. And now that master teacher is impacting everyone in the building instead of just their own classroom. So you get that ripple effect over time. And again, over time you get that longer increase, which is neat. And then you get somebody on the grade level who can step up into a leadership position and kind of take that on. Of course, the research. I can put you to sleep with the research if you wanted, but again, there's a ton of pieces. There's a link actually on our main tab site that's got some of the primary summarized research documents that are on there to support as you're looking and writing the grant. I'm hopeful that by the first of the year, our grant writer for NIT, she's trying to do some bullet points into the grant application so people can look at some of those things, but we're also, if folks are comfortable with it, sending us a draft of the application, and not me, Anissa, will do the work to actually, here's some pieces to consider including in these areas, just to help beef up an application and provide some researcher support to do that. We always do the site visits. You say, hey, I'd like to go see it. I'd like to go see something that's been up longer than just Central Decatur or Saydell. I'd have to take you out of state, but Indiana's probably the closest, best example. Knox, Tennessee. If you want something warm, we could go to Arizona too, if you want to get out of some of the cold. But sometimes it's neat just to see what that piece is, and I would recommend that maybe after the grant is up if you've got some of that money to do that. National conference, always welcome. On the ground support, webinars, whatever's going to work for you. We want to be able to provide in terms of some of that. Biggest things for you to consider would be that hiring, getting the staffing, getting the scheduling. Then we get into summer. We do 6 of those 8 days of training over the summer, ideally at the AEA here. Just take advantage of a central location for folks, unless a district offers to host, and we can rotate those through participating districts as well, whatever works for you. And then we come back in after the first of the year, we do the follow-up, the final 2 pieces. Leadership team recertifies every year, so once they go through the initial core training, we hand them certificates of completion. We actually have a little assessment at the end, so they watch a video, score it, write a post-conference, it's scored against the rubric for post-conferences, and then we kind of give them a pass. If they don't fit, guess what? We provide reinforcements and refinements, and we help them coach them through to get them to pass. And there are people that don't pass, always. It's just, most of the people overanalyze it and make it harder than it is. But we can tell coach through, but then everyone recertifies every year. They go online to the TAP portal, they click the recertification link, they enter their information, they go through, they watch a video that's been nationally rated and scored. They score it, they answer some questions about post-conferencing and watch the videos at the end, and then it instantly generates their report, they print off their certificate, and they're good to go each year. But it's a great piece to go back to teachers going, well, how do I know this is going to be accurate? It's like, you know what, not only are they taking a 2-unit college course in terms of time and information, but they have to recertify every year. The leadership team is continually looking at those opportunities to make sure that reliability is there. I'm hopeful that one of the universities here in the state, and we've reached out to a few, by the time this rolls out for core training, we have the syllabus already developed for the core training. That one will actually give, we're going to ask for 2 units of credit, so that if teachers wanted to pay the university for the university credit, works for the university because it's a moneymaker for them and they don't have to do anything. And then, but just as a way to help, make this an incentive for teachers, hey, I've got to do that time and we can come and do that. That's really the broad overview. I'll give you my cards before we go, and it's got my cell phone on there. Truly feel free anytime. Call, email, text. Phone sometimes is tough just because I'm normally out in buildings working with folks, but I will always get back to you or call you back or email you back. You'll see emails going out at midnight, but that's my typical email time. I get back onto it. I hear you. What thoughts, questions?
What is the cost?
Great question. Initially coming out of the gate, and really the cost falls into the training pieces. I mean, that really is where the cost is involved. If a district solely were to have to do this on their own and not be able to partner, training for the company, it's $1,500 a day, but that includes travel and those type of pieces. So, training materials, things that go into that. So that initial 8-day training is $12,000. Now, 2 districts split that, it's $6,000. 3 districts, it's 4. 4 districts, it's 3. And that's what we would want to do. And we would initially reach out. We'd look geographically, do our little map with our pins and go, okay, we're going to try and cluster these districts together and go, hey, this is only going to be $1,000 for you, $2,000 for you. Why? Because that's helpful. The ongoing follow-up support's the same thing. It's the $1,500. So if we did, 2 days a month for some training and on-site things, again, we bring groups together and be able. You could get that down to 3-4 districts that apply $400 or $500 a district for a couple days a month. Ideally, that becomes well. I know a lot of districts that I've talked to are looking at their. There's a teacher professional development fund, and I forget the name in Iowa. What it's called. It's the money that the state gives for professional development. So we're looking at some of that. We're looking at Title II funds if we have them. Title I funds under the professional development umbrella of Title I. If you have Title I funds, very appropriate, very applicable. We're hopeful that if it's large enough, again, partnering with some of the AEAs, and it'll probably be a conversation that my CEO and Director Buck will have about, I think an ideal vision would be that the state gives some funding to the AEAs to be able to support some form of like an executive master teacher role, director type role at each of the AEAs to support ongoing in the building. So we would provide that same training, then they can go out and then coach and support when we're not here to be able to keep that conversation going.
It's a conversation that has been had or is in the works? Or?
Initially, and then it was the direction. Let's see how many and where.
Okay.
So I don't know if politically they could shift money toward a specific project, but maybe it's supporting all teacher leadership grant participants, and we just happen to train the folks in TAP. And I think there's some things that can be worked out. I'm hopeful.
And I don't want to take up their time, just like, I can talk when it's time. I'm also interested in how we merge the work that we're already doing, which there's some overlap
Right.
with the TAP work, so that there may be pieces they don't have to pay for because the AEA is already providing it.
Absolutely.
So we can talk later.
No, that'd be great. I'd enjoy that. So I'm still learning Iowa and everything that's going on in Iowa as well.
Okay, so it's $1,500 per day. Then what's the cost for does that include the cost for the program?
The portal code, the online piece is $2,000. That's it. Outside of that, it's if you decide to go to the national conference, those are not requirements by any means. It's great learning, but if you want to go to the national conference, you go to the national conference. If you want to do the summer institutes, you can do the summer institutes. Again, I think that there will be things happening locally in the state just because of the number, ideally in my world, the number of districts that will be participating with it. We can keep that local and keep costs down. Worst case would be driving to Des Moines, and we'll do something like a convention center or something in Des Moines. And I've now driven kind of corner to corner in the state, and you can get to Des Moines from just about anywhere, so without it being too painful.
So if you're sitting in Iowa and looking at the TLC and looking to implement that, the reason that you'd want to have TAP as part of your training is that that would be the bridge to increase student achievement. Is that ultimately what
Absolutely.
you're feeling?
I mean, that is the impact, is that this is designed to increase student achievement.
Whereas if you didn't have TAP, let's say, now we're going to implement TLC, right? And we applied, got that, we're ready to go. What you're saying as far as a rationale is that your student scores and your productivity and efficiency would probably be less if we did not have TAP. I mean,
Typically, and again,
somehow you have to infuse
the rationale,
the rationale, and then your role, our role, what are we trying to get as an end result?
Absolutely. I can think from, and again, just my perspective when I was at the district level, and again, why we liked the TAP system for our district. I didn't have the resources or time or people or even really the expertise to do the amount of research, the amount of digging to pull something together of this quality that I knew had research-based effectiveness behind it. I think I could have pulled something together that was decent, but I'm kind of running a gamble at that point with what was going on. And so when I looked at the pieces that we needed as a district, I needed something that was going to be a solid instructional instrument with a so that was there. I like the multiple career paths, and in this case, the grant's calling for that. I mean, it has to be there, and I think that worked out well. The ongoing support with having a master teacher and then ongoing weekly professional development, that was the other piece that we were missing because we just weren't finding that transfer into the building and into the classroom. And so when we looked at those data pieces, that was really the piece that drove us. You notice I didn't spend a lot of time, any at all, talking about performance-based compensation. It's a nice piece. The direct impact on student achievement is probably of the four, the one where there's the least impact. We've got some pieces that show that there's that impact, but it goes into that teacher collegiality, that idea that everyone's working together. So when we look at that,
Right.
half the money goes toward your observation scores. The other half can either be individual and school-wide goals, or I can talk to 3 districts that I know are specifically writing it this way that want to include it. They're only doing like $400 a teacher because that's all they can afford. But they're going to do it as we believe that we're all pulling for students. So the growth for the elementary school is going to everybody. So half of that, it's an all for one, one for all mentality. I like that a lot. We won't record that for my boss, but I do like that model a lot. Sadell and Central Decatur are stuck. Federal grant under TIF said it had to be a 30-20 model. I like the other model because I think, especially initially, looking at this when it's new and it's something that's potentially scary.
Yeah. Just like you said earlier, the collegiality and the synergy would increase if we're all
Absolutely.
benefiting as opposed to competing with your partner next door. And I know competition is important, but at the same time, how can we create that more dynamic, synergistic?
If I share my strategies that are working with you, then
Right.
overall as a school, we've raised up, and then collectively, that impacts everybody.
Yeah.
Because I know that even though my kindergarten teachers don't have an assessment that's getting, linked to anything high stakes, I'll bet my bread and butter on the success of my school as to how well my kindergarten team does.
True.
If they can get a solid foundation for my kids off, by the time they're getting to 3rd and 4th grade, I'm a step ahead of the game. Absolutely. So their impact may not be directly this year teaching kindergarten, but it's certainly 3 or 4 years down the road.
Right. And then the way that you include some of the non-core teaching positions such as music, physical education, art, how have you seen those teachers involved so that they're making an impact
We've really seen it in a couple of ways. One, we do link them in with a cluster, so they're still learning some of those strategies. I think that what we've seen, and different approaches for different places based on district dynamic. A district I'm thinking of in Louisiana just said art, music, and PE will focus on writing, and that they will do some form of writing and research-based thinking in those classrooms to support thinking as a strategy, as a campus. So I just said, is somewhere in your lesson, that's just what's going to be expected. My personal example with my art and music and PE teachers was math is our school-wide focus. And they asked what grades, what grade needs the biggest impact? Like what's struggling the most? The year was 4th grade. So like, what if we targeted and worked into our art, our music, our PE, some form of math standard? And it may not be, you know, high level, we may not be doing fractions, but if I can make some of those direct connections in my lessons to math, we then link them to that 4th grade math score. And that was how we brought that in. So they were weaved in some of those strategies into those classrooms. So I think there's some different ways that you can look at that to involve them. We did, and the successful schools involved them a lot in the process. Here's our overall focus. And so even at the high school level, where you've got the Spanish teacher that's not assigned to anything, they're doing the strategies, we would still say, you know what, our school-wide focus is reading. We're looking at these strategies that are going to be brought across, you know, that you can still use in your classroom. So we're going to attach those non-academic folks to the reading scores because that was our focus for the year. Math still gets tied to math, language arts still gets tied to language arts scores, but then those non-academic, non-tested academics, our focus was reading. We've given you strategies to improve that. You can do that in social studies, you can do that in French, you can do that in those classes. So that was how we kind of tried to link that up. And across the board, folks were okay with that. That wasn't a hard piece to swallow. If you want to get froggy and start writing student learning objectives for all your non-academics and develop pre and post assessments to give and look at that, it's doable, it's possible. It's a couple of years worth of work to do. I mean, it's a big, daunting task. Good work, but hard work. Other questions? You know, as your teams you know, plan and look at some of these pieces, a couple of questions have come up. We're more than welcome. We kind of have tried to do some of these local things to kind of here's some information about it. Hey, I think I want more people to see this. Again, the site visits are great. If you've got a larger team that you'd like myself or someone from NIH to come out and talk and share locally, absolutely, anytime. We'll be more than willing and happy to do that. If we get in and two things happen, you just say, you know what, I really like the instructional rubric, but for our district, we've got a couple other things in place we think are going to be strong, but we want to use that. Great, we can do that. We can come out and train on the instructional rubric and do those pieces and provide that support. And, it's going to be what works for you. We think the impact, you know, looking at the whole system as a whole, that ongoing provider, that structure with the multiple career paths, that instructional rubric, and affordability. We tell districts, and we're planning an entire TAP system, $300 to $350 a day, to do all 4 elements of TAP is really what's required. And you guys are, I mean, really to some extent, if you don't have to adjust base salary, I know for some districts that's hitting pretty heavy and hard, but if you don't have to adjust base salary, it's a doable number to bring in, worst case, all of the elements but the performance-based compensation. And there have been districts similar sizes, you know, I want to say the two that I'm thinking of are 1,000 and like 1,300. We're able to figure out $400 a teacher for a performance-based piece. So. We'll do that, and then even there's districts. I was talking with Dan Mark over in North Pope, and they're going to apply. They're hopeful. They're like, if they don't get it, can we still come in and use some of our professional development monies to train? Like, we may still put into place some of the systems out of our own resource. It may just be mentor teachers to start and do some stipends, and then can we just train them on the instructional rubric year 1? We're going to reapply year 2 and then do the rest of the training? Absolutely. So if there was something like, you know what, I don't want to miss, I want to get rolling with something, we do that as well. And again, we will still try and combine, so if there's some trainings that need to happen, hey, we need you here for the first 3 days, not all 6 days or not all 8 days. We need you here for the first 3 days. Come on over and combine here at the AEA. We'll do those pieces. So I want to make it as fun, but I'll tell you, this is exciting stuff. I love it. It's the only thing that would have ever got me out of the building. I had my dream job. Small little district, 6 schools. Well, okay, in Phoenix it was a small district of 6 schools and 5,000 kids. But it was really a dream job. And then this came along, and from my heart, it's something I truly believe in, because I've seen nationally the impact at all levels, at all walks of life. And this was really about, I mean, we get in that 8 days of training. It's pretty intense. I mean, it rocks and breaks. People leave with their heads hurt. But it's the right hurt. It's a good hurt. Your brain got to work out, and you're able to get in. So, do you guys have questions around? Call me, get in touch, and